Good day, and welcome to another analysis weekly wraps. I am Vib Govender, and as usual, what we can do is we'll do a start of a general market economic segment, and then end up with a tech segment. We're just going to do two, general market segments this week, or economic segments this week. The first is going to cover U.S. inflation, and then we're going to look at what's happening with regards to the fires in California. And then in our tech segment, we look at the antagonistic relationship between the U.S. and China and how it's kind of heated up at the end of the Biden administration, and what might expect to change going forward. So starting off with the U.S. Inflation rate, U.S. inflation came in at about 2.9%. We saw core inflation come down slightly to just over 3%. And the market reacted really positively to these numbers. Now, the 2.9% CPI number is, I think, a little concerning because we haven't seen inflation come down since the low of 2.4% in September last year. So after that 2.4% low was hit, it's kind of ticked up for the next few months. And I do think that inflation remains a big concern in the US, especially if you consider the fact that we are going to hit a number of factors going forward that are going to be, I think, rather inflation causing. The number one thing I think is the possible tariff war between the US and China, which would obviously reduce the cost of items in the US. But at the same time, we are seeing certain base effects also coming into play. Things like, for instance, this fire we talk about is going to cause an increase in housing prices in parts of the US, and that's obviously going to feed into inflation as well. And obviously, we also are seeing a slight tick up in oil prices as well, which are also going to feed into these inflationary numbers. If we don't see the US cutting interest rates this year due to inflation, that would be, I think, negative not just for markets but also for things like the South African economy and the South African rand. We have seen over the last few weeks the rand blow out to about 19.20 to the US dollar. It's come down since then, especially after these inflation numbers came out to about the 1880s or so. But I do think that going forward, if we don't see at least two rate cuts this year from the US, we could see the emerging market currencies and the emerging markets themselves coming under a bit of stress. I do think that the US economy overall will not really be negatively affected by this. They are sitting at an extremely strong growth rate. They have these new technologies like AI coming into place. And you're seeing incredible salaries. I saw a recent thing being offered for Panda Express, which is like a fast food Chinese place, Chinese takeaway effectively, or Chinese restaurant, let me say. Not a high-end one, but something similar to what we might say in South Africa, like a level of a Spur or something in terms of their overall cachet. A person that's they have there as a manager of a store. The salary was like $100,000 a year. That's 1.9 million rands a year. Okay, to manage a fast food restaurant. That's not peanut money. That's not small amounts of money. And if you look at, for instance, the recent numbers for instance, some of the delivery services that are offering, in excess of $150,000 per year for drivers that have been driving for like 5 years, we see that the US job market remains extremely strong. So I don't think, in terms of the US job market itself or the US economy, that not cutting interest rates quickly is going to be a really strong negative towards the driver for them. But unfortunately, the rest of the world is not quite as strong as the US market or economy, especially at South Africa and just in Europe as well. And because of the power of the US dollar and because of the influence it has in the global economy, if they are not cutting interest rates, much of the rest of the world really can't do much as well. And that includes us in South Africa. Now, moving on to these fires in California, a couple of things to understand. Firstly, they are very, very significant fires. We're talking damage levels ranging from estimates about $150 to $200 billion worth of damage. And we're also seeing knock-on effects coming through. First of all, these fires happen in some of the wealthiest areas in California. These fires also, happened just after many insurance companies basically cancelled fire policies on these homes because the rate of fire and other weather-related conditions like hurricanes in like Florida, etc., has risen quite dramatically over the last few years. And guess what? Climate change, just irrespective of whether you think it's human caused or we should do anything about it, is to some extent real. We definitely are seeing variations in weather that are causing this to a certain extent. At the same time, we are seeing, of course, not to just poke one thing, we are seeing, reasons for this that are also to do with the fact that, there has been certain, environmental management condition, efforts that are not being done as normal, like things like controlled burning of forests and clearing away dead wood, etc. And of course, not having the infrastructure in place like water, etc., to fight the fires. But the fires, like I said, are going to basically ramp up over time, because of the fact that weather conditions are going to make it more likely. But what's important about the fact that we're not seeing, or we saw a lot of these policies being cancelled. That means if your house burned down, you may have lost the entire value of that house except for the land. You may not be able to rebuild because yes, some of the guys that own these houses, people like Mel Gibson, are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But some of them are just people that bought a house and not like normal people, that even if they're quite wealthy, where a lot of their net worth is tied up with the house, and they can't basically get that house insured. And if it did burn down and they have no insurance on it, they are not going to be able to rebuild that very easily. We've seen, because of the fact that so much housing has been affected, that people had to move to different areas, etc., that housing rental prices have gone up in the other areas that are not affected. If you have to live and someone like Mel Gibson has to move, his property to somewhere else, guess what? Mel Gibson's money is going to bid your money and bid up the price of the property rental or whatever. And so I do think that that's probably going to be felt to a certain extent with some of the inflation numbers, next few months, etc., coming through the US. At the same time, you're also likely to see, if the rebuilding does start, a jump up in the cost of construction workers, because people are going to find more opportunity to work in places like California, get paid a bit more of a salary than they would in other parts of the country. Equipment will go there, material will go there, etc. And that will obviously, like I said, cause a bit of an uptick in inflation as well. Now, an important fact to mention about this is that, California has some of the highest restrictions and regulations in the world regarding building. So if you want to do something minor, it often takes you many years to get the approval. That, I think, may just have to go away. If it doesn't, then these pieces of land are going to be basically left as they are for multiple years until approvals are given for permits, etc. If they're not, we're likely to see a building boom that's going to be pretty significant. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stimulus, effectively, in the building sector for the US. And even the US economy is quite large. That's still, I think, going to have an impact, especially in terms of pricing going forward. Now, looking at the dispute between the US and China for our tech segment, I want to first off highlight the two things that I think were important in the last week or so. Firstly, we had TikTok being banned, the TikTok ban being approved by US courts, and therefore likely to go in the next couple of days. The next thing is we are seeing a new set of regulations around the availability of chips to much of the world, controlled by the US government. So let's start with the TikTok ban, and then we move on to the rest of things. So in terms of the TikTok ban, that is something that I think has been in play for multiple months, and it just had to move its way through the court system, and now it's ready to be implemented. And if we don't see the ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, sell in the next basically couple of days, that app is going to be shut down by next week. Now, TikTok, for those that don't know, is a very popular video sharing app, kind of like YouTube, but very short videos. Much more dependent on things like the algorithm than YouTube is. And it is very, very valuable. I mean, valuation estimates for TikTok, some cases exceed $100 billion. And now, if you're a business person and, for whatever reason, there's been a government, vendetta against your company, let me say, and the government says you're going to sell your company or shut down. So if you shut down, obviously the company is worth nothing, but if you sell it, at least you get some money back. And like I said, this is a $100 billion company. Maybe you might get 80 billion, 90 billion, who knows? Or even get, like, say, 70 billion or 50 billion, half the price. 50 billion is still a lot better than nothing. However, we are seeing evidence that the company is saying they'd rather shut down than sell. And this, in fact, reinforces the idea this is actually a Chinese-controlled company or government-controlled company, because no normal businessman is going to say, I'd rather destroy my business and get 50 billion for it, because the business is actually worth 100 billion. 50 billion is still worth a lot of money, and as a business person, you should be willing to accept that. And the reason that people are so concerned about Chinese control of TikTok, even though like the management, etc., is like, no, it's Singaporean, is because they say there's two ways this affects the US negatively. First, there is the idea that the TikTok app steals data. I don't believe that to be, very strong. They don't believe there's very strong evidence for that. The reason being is that it's very easy to spot when an app steals your data. If you give a phone that has TikTok in it to a cyber specialist, they'll be able to trace every single thing that the app is sending back to the parent company, and you'll be able to spot when it's sending stuff that should not be sent. Like stealing information from your phone, etc. No doubt it is sending information, but no more information that you'd have Apple or Amazon or Facebook, etc. is taken from you, or Instagram, etc. Maybe you don't want that information to go to a foreign party, but I don't think it's something that they are doing that is in excess of what we see the other social networks doing. But the other argument behind them is that the algorithm is basically used to sow discontent in the US, and they point to things like that guy Luigi who assassinated the insurance CEO, and a lot of people on TikTok were actually supporting this murder, and people were arguing that this is the kind of stuff that was negative to the US, that was basically promoted by the Chinese. They also point out to some kind of different trends in the last few years, things like for instance social unrest, particularly was important, things like the BLM rights, etc. back in a few years ago, just after COVID lockdowns occurred, and those things I think may have a bit of stronger evidence behind it. And they also point in terms of reciprocity, the fact of the matter is that we are seeing, the Chinese not having a free market for their internet services. So Google, Facebook, etc. don't operate as easily in China. They don't operate in China in some cases at all. And if that's the case, then why should you let the Chinese apps operate in your country freely? Okay. And the second thing that occurred this week, by the way, one last thing. There's rumors that Elon Musk might be in the market to buy TikTok. Now, if that does occur, he'd rival Zuckerberg in terms of his reach, in terms of social media, and in terms of what's happening in the tech sector. I think that's going to be an important factor going forward. Now, the next thing is this chip ban, or chip restrictions being put up by the US government. It happened in the last few days, and basically breaks down to this. There's going to be three tiers in the chip world. There's tier 1 that includes US, basically Western Europe, Japan, places like Australia. There's tier 2 that includes everything from like Yemen to Singapore, including places like Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, India. And then there's going to be tier 3, which is places like China, Russia, North Korea, those kind of places where you can't do much at all. Tier 1, you can do whatever you want to, basically. Tier 2, restrictions in terms of how much chips you can get, how much power you can get. There's 3, you get basically nothing. Now, there's two ways to look at this thing. If AI is going to happen in the next year or two, this is probably a smart thing to do, because what it means is that it means that it guarantees that the US gets AGI first. It means that the Chinese don't have the ability to catch up, and once AGI is created, whoever gets it first basically wins the race. It's over. The first people with AGI are virtually going to ensure their dominance for, if not at least years or decades, maybe even forever. It's a long time, but it really is one of those cases where you win this thing, you win basically everything. Now, if it doesn't occur like that, if AGI takes maybe 10 to 20 years to happen, this could backfire massively. Why? Because what you've done is you've gone out and you've said to places like India, Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, big economies, South Africa, if you want to play in that kind of sphere as well, Vietnam, and all these countries. If you want to get AGI chips, you have to be a customer of the Chinese, because the Americans are not going to sell them to you, at least another rate you want them to be. That means that the Chinese chip makers suddenly have a captive market of most of the world, including some of the biggest economies in the world. India is a poor country, but it's a very big economy. Brazil is a big economy. Malaysia, Indonesia, these are big economies. Singapore, also, it's a very small place, but it's a very rich place. And you're going to be seeing a lot of demand, guaranteed demand, coming through for the inference chips, for the training chips of these Chinese companies, which makes any investment that they do into these particular things, very valuable. And over a period of a decade or two, that's the kind of thing that you basically would almost guarantee that you'd have the Chinese chip sector grow fast and likely rival, if not exceed, what's available in Western Europe and in America. You basically are giving the Chinese chip makers steroids, saying, here's a huge market, it's all yours, go do what you want to do. We're not going to compete with you. And so if it costs a bit more, if it's not up to the scratch, it doesn't matter. They're still going to be able to get all this market because the US is not going to sell to it. Okay. So, like I said, if AI takes longer than expected, this could really badly backfire on the US. And speaking of that, President Biden has resigned, or not resigned, but is leaving office, obviously. Next week, the 20th, is the inauguration of Trump, and then Trump takes over. It happens very quickly. On that day, Trump moves in, Biden moves out of the White House. The whole, thing becomes Trump's. And in his basically farewell speech, he talked about a couple of things. He talked about oligopolies, and he talked about AI and how important AI is for the future. I also already mentioned AI and what's happened right now. And oligopolies, he mentioned the fact that the tech industrial complex is what's really bothering him. Kind of a play on the words of the military industrial complex, first used by, or kind of popularized by Eisenhower, we're talking in the 1950s. So, if we are seeing a tech industrial complex in play in the US, what is that going to mean going forward? Well, we have seen already a strong move, not just by Elon Musk, and people obviously know Elon Musk is a Trump supporter, but Mark Zuckerberg is not. And if you had to look at the last few interviews he's given, has come out strongly, anti-Biden, pro-Trump. Amazon, Amazon does Amazon Prime, which is that Netflix competitor, has given a $40 million deal for a documentary on Melania Trump. Now, Melania Trump may be, an interesting person, but a $40 million deal for a documentary, this is the kind of money you spend on, the next, movie by Jordan Peele or something. Not the kind of money you spend for a documentary about a first lady. That's crazy. We've seen Tim Cook donate money to the Trump inauguration. And we're seeing people like, David Sachs, a guy who used to work at PayPal, being part of administration, the AI and crypto czar. Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist, the guy that started Netscape, is actively being involved in the interviews for people that are going to staff the administration. He's deciding who they hire. Peter Thiel, obviously, a big play in there. And so we're seeing a huge shift towards, a more tech-friendly administration. And I bring this up for a couple of reasons. Elon Musk is not anti-China. A lot of these guys are not as anti-China as people think. And we could easily see that the Trump administration is a lot less anti-China than the Biden administration was, especially considering the moves they made over the last couple of months. And so we need to see exactly what the resolution of this is going to be going forward. And by the way, Jensen Huang, also the last couple of weeks, much more pro-Trump. And in fact, if you look at NVIDIA's latest statement on this particular thing, this restriction on chip sales, it's very anti-Biden, it's very pro-Trump. And so, yes, these restrictions are coming to play. Yes, we are seeing some moves coming to play with regards to things like TikTok and the chips, etc. But I expect the Trump administration to have a very different view of things than what the Biden administration has. And the one final thing I would like to mention is that Trump has a very strong relationship with basically Modi in India. The people in his cabinet have a strong relationship with a number of different countries out there. And I do think that maybe even if this kind of regulations do go through, we may see a bit of adjustments to just who the countries in tier 1 and tier 2 are going to be. And they might be even like a separate, tier 2 point whatever, that might be allowed for, or 1 point whatever, allowing places like India and Brazil, etc., to, have more access than they currently do under the current legislation. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.